Hello and welcome to my video all about how to hand sew the blanket stitch. I have a video on this subject already, but I had a few comments that it was a bit slow. So if you do want a slow demo and more detail, then feel free to check that video out. But this video is going to be my quick demo version. Okay, so first you need to feed your piece of thread through your needle and then put a knot at the other end. I would recommend that the piece of thread is at least 5 times the length of the edge you want to stitch. And I would also recommend that you use a thicker than usual thread because after all, the blanket stitch is designed to be seen. The knot that I've made is just a regular single knot. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is decide what stitch length you want to use. Normally it's around 1/4 inch or 5mm, so you can use that as the default. However, if you're stitching a large blanket or other large project, you might want to increase that stitch length. I take my needle through the back layer of fabric first, with the distance between the needle and the fabric edge being my chosen stitch length. I pull my thread through, and this hides the knot between the 2 layers. I then bring my needle to the front, and this time I feed it through both layers of fabric, from front to back. I try and make my needle emerge from the back of the fabric at exactly the same point as where the thread just left, or as close as I possibly can get it. I then pull the thread through, but I don't fully tighten it. Instead, I take my needle from right to left through the loop that I've formed, and then I tighten. Please note that I tighten the thread by holding it directly above the stitch. This makes it easier to tighten it vertically and to have more control over the stitch. I will be stitching from left to right, as you will probably be if you're right-handed. As a result, when we come to making the stitches, my needle will go from right to left, so in the opposite direction to the direction we're travelling. Obviously, if you're left-handed, you'll no doubt want to reverse this motion. For the next stitch, we go from front to back through both layers. Traditionally, the space between the stitches is the same as the stitch length, so bear that in mind when you're doing this. So we move about a stitch length to the right and go from front to back through the felt. In this instance, I don't need to take the needle from the right to the left through the loop, and that's because it's already gone through the loop because of how the needle emerged from the back of the felt. If the needle emerges in front of the thread, then that means that it's already gone through the loop, and so there's one less step to do. It's completely up to you how you do it and what's easier for you. And then we just repeat. So you go from front to back. If the needle emerges behind the thread, then you need to do the extra step of going through the loop. And then tighten. And then we just repeat. A few stitches away from the corner, you want to be pre-planning in your head where you want the stitches to be positioned, because you want to leave enough space at the end for you to be able to make a nice square corner. To go around the corner, you first need to go from front to back through the exact same place where you just went through the felt. So you go through that same place to the back, and then take the needle through the loop and tighten. When you tighten it, make sure you do so in a diagonal direction, like so. You don't want to over tighten because that's going to squash the corner. Feel free to rearrange the thread using your needle. You then do exactly the same thing. So you go from front to back through that same point again, then feed the needle through the loop, and this time tighten so it's horizontal. What you're trying to form is a square with a diagonal line through the centre. And then you simply carry on, as usual, along this edge. One tip I want to share with you, which might make it easier, is to use masking tape as a guide. Here I've got a short length of floral tape, which to be honest isn't tacky enough. Masking tape is a lot better, and it's simply a straight line that you can attach to your fabric. You can then stitch along the edge of this tape, and it will keep all of your stitches nice and level. You can also measure and mark points along the tape. So if you want your stitches 5mm apart, you can use a ruler and pen to mark 5mm, 10mm, 15mm, etc. along the length of the tape. So then not only will it keep the stitches level, but it will keep them evenly spaced as well. Another good tip is to draw a couple of marks on your thumb. All you do is get a pen and mark the distance you want between the stitches on your thumb, like so. Then you just use this guide to help you space the stitches evenly and neatly. When you want to finish stitching, you need to secure your thread. What I do is take my needle between the layers of fabric and take it from front to back through the back layer, at the same point where the thread just left the felt. I almost tighten the thread and then take my needle from right to left through the loop and then tighten. I then like to take my needle between the fabric layers underneath the last stitch. Then I pull the thread until it's almost tight, take the needle through the loop that's formed, and then tighten to form a knot. I then take my needle between the layers and out one side of the fabric. I remove the needle, pull on the thread a little, and then cut off the excess. And that's my blanket stitch finished. And now I'm going to give you a quick lesson on how to add blanket stitch to a folded hem. So if you want to fold over the edge of a blanket, for instance, to make a thicker edge, or if you just want to use a fabric that frays and you've already hemmed the edge and now want to add a blanket stitch, then this is how you do it. To start this stitch, you need to take your needle up through the top of the hem, going from the inside of the fold. This encloses the knot in the hem out of sight. You then need to take your needle from front to back and make sure that it comes up next to the edge of the hem and in line with where the thread just left the felt. You then take your needle from right to left through the loop and tighten, and this will give you a nice neat first stitch. And you then basically carry on exactly how you would with a normal blanket stitch, except when you take the needle from front to back, you come up next to the hem edge, like so. And you just carry on in the same manner along the edge. The next and final technique that I'm going to go over is what is known as graded or scalloped edging. Basically, all you do is a normal blanket stitch, but with a shorter distance between the stitches, and you go from a short stitch length to a long stitch length and back again, all along the edge. I definitely encourage you to experiment with stitch length and the distance between the stitches to create different patterns. In this example, I went for a more sharp zigzag design, but you can soften those points to make a more rounded scallop design. The way that I think about this design as I'm stitching it is to give the shorter stitch a number 1 label and the longer stitch a number 4 label. So as I'm stitching it, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, and so on and so forth. And that just keeps me on track and lets me know which stitch I have to do next. Okay, so that's all the varieties of blanket stitch I'm going to be showing you today. I really hope it's been useful to you, and thank you very much for watching.